and welcome to another episode of Love Selling, Hate Sales. Today, I am joined by Andy Paul, who is an author, podcaster, speaker, and consultant. Andy, thank you for joining the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
I mean, you can't do all those things and not be a consultant, right? Like you got to get paid for this.
Oh
somehow.
yeah, I know. Yeah, I do some. I mean, I do a little less than I used to. But it's still there.
A little less than you used to is probably a good place to be, right? Like you get to that point where you're like just grinding. You want to do a little bit less.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I used to do more big consulting projects or real wholesale sales transformation type things for small, mid-sized companies, and don't do that quite as much. More sort of coaching and advising CEOs and sales leaders on things they should be doing.
Things they should be doing. Well, let's talk about some things that anyone in sales should be doing. And sales is, no problem at all. Sales is one of those things that kind of has a stigma floating around it, right? It's going all the way back to, I don't know, forever, where,
I'd say, when did commerce start? 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, probably about then. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what was a commercial that just came out? I don't know if it was this Super Bowl or the last Super Bowl, where it was one of the car vending machine commercials. And they were kind of using the salesperson as this anti-salesperson ad, right? They get dropped in and it's like the carny saying, "Oh, come here, do a demo, take a test drive." And it was just like really pitching the salesperson as the worst possible human being on the planet. And that's why you would go to a car vending machine and buy a car.
Yeah, and that stereotype persists, as you know, and it's on one hand exaggerated and unfair, and on the other hand, it's well deserved.
Yeah, so I mean that's what we're up against, right? I mean, if you're in sales in some capacity, and I would say that the most of the folks listening to this show are probably in the B2B SaaS world in some cases, but you're certainly still up against some of those same perceptions, right?
Yeah, well, I said it's in some cases unfair, but they exist for a reason, because this is the way salespeople act.
Yeah.
And it's part of the reason I wrote my latest book, Sell Without Selling Out, as you talked about, is because we're really not getting better at that dimension of it. And it's having an impact on not just how buyers perceive sellers, but also sellers' ability to perform at high levels.
Yeah. And so we're not getting any better at it. Who are we blaming for not getting better at it? Is it leadership? Is it your own personal accountability? Is it you don't know any better? Let's kind of get to the root of this a little bit.
It's a mix. Everything's a mix, right?
Yeah.
But I think it starts with culture that you set, the expectations you set for sellers in terms of what their jobs are, which is sort of ultimately leadership's responsibility, but some of it's just like in the ether, right? I mean, I was talking to a woman who she's like dean of a sales program at Kansas State University, which is Dawn Dieter Schmeltz, and she's one of the oldest, more established undergraduate sales programs. You actually get a degree in sales.
Interesting.
And she talks about working with freshmen coming in. They're taking their introduction to professional selling course, and they do role playing. And these people have no sales experience whatsoever, no exposure to sales whatsoever. And they default to being hugely salesy, right?
Interesting.
Behaviors that are actually learned behaviors somehow. It's like, pitchy and, self-driven and, purely self-interested and manipulative. And it's like, well, that's just in the ether. That's what we think sales is, right? People that know nothing about sales, and you tell them to sell something, they automatically default to this behavior that buyers hate. And that, quite frankly, most sellers hate as well, having to practice, but they feel this pressure somewhat culturally. This is how sellers act.
Right.
And so the premise of my book in one of them is say, look, we could take all these behaviors I call salesy or I call selling out that our buyers resist, that our buyers hate, that sellers for the most part hate. And we could just stop doing it. We could do cold turkey today. You and I could declare a holiday, Josh, that today is the end of selling out. And across the world, everybody would just agree, we're going to stop this. And you know what? No one would be worse off because of it.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. And I think that the culture and the perception that's created is gone into, I don't know if you saw this study by Gartner not too long ago, but basically they polled all of these buyers, this is enterprise level buyers, saying, if you could do this without a salesperson, would you, basically? And it was like high 90s percentage. Like, yeah, if we could get away with salespeople, we would. I don't know if that's reality, but what are your thoughts?
So yeah, I think that's bullshit, right? Yes. So now, but for this reason, is if you're a seller who's selling out, if you have no value to add to the buyer, right, then they don't have time for you. And I agree 100% in that case. But so, this blanket statement that buyers don't want to talk to sellers, they absolutely do. They just don't want to talk to those types of sellers. And as long as the salesy sellouts are the sort of majority of the professional sales world, they'll find another way to do it, because how are we helping them? But if you're, any self-aware organization says, look, we have a problem because, we think we know what our problem is. We think we know what we're trying to achieve.
Right.
We sit around internally and we chat about it. But the self-aware organization knows, we really need an outside perspective to help us think, are we really thinking about this the right way? Right.
Right.
And there's actually been studies done about this whole issue about, if you heard of strong ties and weak ties, right? So when you're working with people, you have strong ties. And what happens is that you sort of start homogenizing all the things Right. And the sociologists talk about as being the information is redundant. I mean, we all know the same things.
Right.
Well, you need somebody that has weak ties, like a salesperson, if they're able to do this, to come in and help you think a little bit differently, right? Provide some insights, help you make think, change your paradigm about how you sell. Well, I said self-aware organizations know that's what we need. They're just hoping that the salespeople they talk to can do that. If they can't, they have no time for them. So it's really this thing is that, the buyers are starting getting frustrated and saying, if you can't help us, we will do this on our own. It's not that we prefer to do it on our own. That's where I think they get it wrong. It's not that we prefer to. We prefer to make the best decision we can.
Right.
Within the constraints that we have.
Right.
We want to make a good decision. If you can help us with that, great. We want your input. If you can't help us, we have no time for you. We're just going to do it on our own.
It's so interesting. I was just getting ready to ask you, like, define value, but you did it, right? Basically, it's getting.
Well, I have a specific definition of value from a buyer's perspective. So from a buyer's perspective, value is that if I'm going to invest my time and attention in you, right?
Right.
So you send me an email, I have to invest my time and attention. We have a Zoom call, I have to invest my time and attention.
Absolutely.
I need to get a return on that time and attention. And the way that's value. And how do I measure that value? Is that as a result of this interaction, at the end of this interaction, whatever it is, I'm closer to making a decision than I was before it. So value is progress, right? As a result of investing my time and attention, I've made progress toward making a decision, meaning I've made progress toward completing this job that's been assigned to me, right? Which is taking time away from my real job. Right. This is the thing is, especially in enterprise level, there's increasing numbers of stakeholders involved in decisions, all involved in this one process that's not part of their job.
Yeah.
So what do they want to do? They want to get it done with the least investment of their time and attention possible. Because I'm not being paid to do this. I'm being paid to do something else. So if you can't help them, I said, make progress every time you interact with them and every time you demand some of their time and attention, they've got no time for you.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I love what you said about, because you think about what you're describing there is a little bit further down in a sales cycle, right? Like even the process of helping someone coordinate that group of stakeholders and really align on next steps could have inherent value at some point in the cycle.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Yeah.
But what you said earlier around getting people out of their echo chamber and getting them to think differently, like that could be that inherent value that you're providing when you're trying to get people to think differently, right? Like they may not even know they have a problem yet and they're trying to solve things and things like that. That I found super fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, well, comes about in several different ways, but that is a role that we play as salespeople. Is can we help people really think more deeply and broadly about the challenges they face, and think more deeply and broadly about the outcomes they can achieve by addressing the challenges?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's one of those things where, as I said, as a seller, you hear it all the time. Well, we need to provide value, right? We need to be focused on them. We need to do this. We need to do that. But it's like, okay, great. What does that mean? Like, give me some.
Exactly.
Give me some tactics.
That's right. Well, but let's start with the mindset first, right?
Yeah, please.
So the mindset is, we need to provide them value. All right, but so how do they denominate value? How do they measure value? Well, progress. Right? So if we know that progress is value, then we have to be very intentional about how we provide the value. And so I write about in my book is, look, you need to create a very simple, what I call value plan for every interaction you plan to have with the buyer. So if you're a sales leader and you're going to say you're going to do a pipeline review with a seller, you're going to go through their list of qualified opportunities.
Yeah.
And for each opportunity, the seller needs to be answered two simple questions.
Okay.
What does the buyer need from us in this next interaction to help them move closer to making a decision? And as a result of receiving that from us, what steps will they commit to take? And if a seller can't answer those basic questions about every opportunity in their pipeline, then they need to take a step back. More discovery needs to be done. More questions need to be asked. More trust needs to be built so they can earn the right to get the answers they need.
Yeah.
So in my book, I talk about, the opposite of selling out is selling in. There's 4 pillars of selling in: connection, curiosity, understanding, and generosity. Now, these are innately human behaviors.
Yeah.
That drive this buyer-centric way of selling, which also, by the way, executed properly, compresses decision cycles, going to increase your win rates.
Yeah.
So start with connection. Connection. We are wired to connect, right? As humans, we're wired to connect with other people.
Absolutely.
We want to do that. Through doing that, we're going to build some level of trust with the buyer. Everybody talks about trust, but why is the trust important? Well, trust is important because when we ask our questions, when we deploy our curiosity, in the absence of trust, do we get the answers we want?
Right.
No.
Definitely not.
No. You're going to get the same superficial answers they'd give some stranger off the street.
Exactly right.
Right? So we need to build that level of trust through that connection. So that's the first pillar. Curiosity is second pillar. In the book, I outline 6 different question types you can ask, at least that I have found hugely effective for me. But they enable you to serve the point of what your questioning is, and it sort of leads into the understanding pillar is, as sellers, unfortunately, it's sort of the cultural thing is we sort of train sellers, or we socialize sellers to believe that their job is to go out and persuade somebody to buy their product.
That's right.
And I think, no, that's not the job at all. Our job as a seller is to listen to our buyer, understand the things that are most important to them in terms of the challenges they face and the outcomes they want to achieve, and then help them get that.
That's right.
All right. So if you think your job is to persuade, well, you don't really care about understanding because it doesn't really matter. You're trying to persuade them to buy your product, right?
You're focused on you.
You're focused on you and what you need to do and the tactics and techniques and manipulation you'll use to get there. Whereas here, if I really understand what's most important to you, then you and I can agree on a target that we're going to work on together to try to achieve.
That's right. Because you're making them the center of it all.
They're the center of it. So when I understand that, when I get that level of understanding, then I can work with the buyer and say, well, what do I need to provide them to shape what I call the vision of success, right? Because and you know this, when your customers sign an order, what are they buying? In their mind, what are they buying? They're not buying your product.
No. They're buying the outcome. They always ask.
They're buying the vision of what it's going to be like to use your product. That's what I call the vision of success.
Yeah.
Well, Forrester did a study, I don't know, 10 plus years ago, roughly about 10 years ago, maybe is about this concept and saying, wow, an enterprise level, if you can be the vendor that is sort of first to get the buyer to buy into your vision of success,
yeah,
your odds of winning go up astronomically. That's like 65% chance of winning.
Makes sense.
Well, wouldn't you want those odds? So that's part of your generosity, is helping the buyer, co-create this vision of success. I describe how you go about that in the book. But when you look at this and sort of in all combined, it's saying, look, well, if I could be the first to that connection, that first to trust, right, first seller to trust, then I'll be the first seller really to be able to get the answers I need to reach that level of understanding. So if I'm first to understanding, then I can be the first to the vision of success.
Right.
If I can be the first to the vision of success, then what happens is, this is based in part on Nobel Prize winning Herbert Simon, Nobel Prize winner Herbert Simon's work on theory of bounded rationality. He said, look, when people make a decision, they have three constraints: time, they have unlimited time, don't have unlimited access to information, and don't have perfect, or they have, by necessity, have a limited understanding of the information they can get.
Right.
And so what he found is that when people get into that situation, that when they do their research for making a decision, when they find a solution that satisfies their requirements and suffices to enable them to hit their desired outcomes, they make the decision.
Right.
That's called the good enough decision.
Good enough.
And this is what buyers do. This is the predominant form of decision. People aren't trying to make the absolute best decision because it takes too much time and effort to investigate all the alternatives to feel assured that you've made the best decision. Now, there are some people that do that. But he said, the world, basically, he created this world called satisfice. He said there's people that are satisficers and there's people that are maximizers. Satisficers make the good enough decision. Maximizers will indeed spend all their time, as much time as possible, to investigate all their alternatives to satisfy themselves. They're making the absolute best choice. But the world's mostly satisficers.
Yeah.
Think about it from a corporate standpoint. You've got 10 people, 10 stakeholders involved with making a decision, and you're trying to buy, let's say, a SaaS product for, I don't know, conversational intelligence. You've got your note taker here on the screen.
Absolutely.
Is, hey, 2 years ago, there was, I don't know, maybe a dozen companies doing that. Now there's like 3 dozen, 4 dozen companies that do it. What's the difference between the products? I mean, think about it. I mean, in the mind's eye of the buyer, they're basically all the same.
Probably all the same. Yeah. So
what's the difference? The difference is you.
Yeah.
It's you, the seller. You are the difference. They're going to, we know from Challenger and Gartner and others that the majority of the criteria buyers use in those situations to make a decision based on their interactions, their experience with the individual seller. So if you are the first, as I said, first to connection, the first to trust, first to curiosity, first to understanding, first to vision of success, and their experience with you is good, they're saying, well, phew, these products are basically all alike. I mean, we could spend another 2 months to investigate, but my experience with Josh really did a good job on this. Let's do it.
Let's go.
Let's go. And this is what happens. This is what happens. Now that's a way you compress a decision cycle. I mean, if you're coming from the point of view of seller, I'm going to accelerate sales. It's like, well, you're trying to push the buyer. They've got their own time frame.
Got their own agenda.
But if you can help them to get to that vision of success first, that good enough decision point, they're going to do it.
Yeah, and if they're involved in building that vision of success, then they're going to take the steps, going back to your 2 questions that the sales leader needs to ask in the pipeline meeting, right? Like if they're invested in that vision for success, they're going to help you answer those questions, right? They're going to go with you towards getting that vision.
That's right. And the thing is that this requires you keep engaged with your curiosity throughout the entire process. One of the, again, reasons I think we don't get better, haven't been getting better, is that we're still trying to sell in ways we sold decades ago. Right. And, there's this sort of myth with, when the SaaS business sort of grew up and we started bringing all these sales technologies in, you would hear all these people say, oh, well, we're modern sellers. Well, what's that? Well, basically what we've done is we've taken we've taken these bad sales behaviors that we've been practicing for decades and we automated them.
Sure.
And it's like, yeah. So you're saying it's just amplified the bad behavior.
So more of the bad, more of the worst stuff out there. That sounds
right. And that's modern. No. So what I propose in the book is something that actually is more modern, is aligned with how the buyers want to buy, help you enable them to make their decisions more quickly, which is what buyers want. I mean, I ask people oftentimes, so what's your buyer's job? Right? Talking about the group of stakeholders, what's your buyer's job? And they say, oh, to achieve a certain outcome. I said, well, no, that's their goal for what they want to achieve. What's their job? Oh, yeah. And I said, what buyers want? Buyers just want to quickly gather, because again, this isn't their primary work, right? They're not getting their bonus based on this. It is they want to quickly gather and make sense of the information they need,
right,
to make a good decision with the least investment of their time and attention possible. That's what your buyers want to do. They don't want to spend forever to do it if they don't have to spend forever to do it. So it just aligns with how you use the 4 pillars to say, yeah, I can help you get that job done with less of your resources.
So curious, you see a lot of chatter, especially on LinkedIn and things like that, of not losing to the competition, but losing to status quo, right? So sure. Where are you falling down, do you think, in those 4 pillars the most if you're losing to status quo? No decision.
Understanding. Not getting to the level of understanding, right? And I talk about this in the book, is the way most sales is transacted is we teach our sellers, look, here's the playbook.
Right.
Here's our ICP. Here's the persona of who we're talking to. Ask these questions.
Right.
It's like
inputs and outputs.
Yeah. But basically what you're doing is just gathering information at that point. So you know something, but what do you understand? Now you look a lot of times in the sales playbook and they say, well, look, we have for discovery, which is this box near the beginning, we've got these exit criteria. If you know these things, you're done with discovery.
You can move on. Yeah.
Yeah. You're never done with discovery. You discover up until the time you sign the agreement, you're discovering something about that buyer. If you're not, you're in real danger of losing it. Right. Yeah,
big time. So well, I always think of the Chris Voss in Never Split the Difference, right? Have you read that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I always think of that, right? My takeaway from his methodology was, well, there's discovery and negotiation. That's it. And you're discovering all the way until negotiation. Otherwise because you're trying to understand more things that are going to help you in that negotiation. Yeah.
I mean, it's fundamentally the same thing. It's yeah, well, that'd be a whole separate interview we could do on that. But yeah, you can't get up too soon. So what you do is, okay, I know something, but what do I understand about it? Why do I understand this knowledge I have? What do I really understand? Why it's important to the buyer? What's the context in which it's important to the buyer? And sellers stop too soon.
Sure.
And so again, if you can't help the buyer think differently about what it is they're trying to achieve or the challenges they're trying to face and address, then yeah, there's no reason to make a change.
Yeah.
No reason to make a change. So you really have to think, okay, well, what's this paradigm the buyer is sort of operating under? And can I help shift that paradigm? If I can, then I'm creating impetus for change. If I can't, then they'll just stay doing what they're doing.
Yeah. And it sounds like a lot of that understanding comes into their motivations, right? Like,
if you understand what's most important to them. And I tell people is when you think about discovery, not as being sort of this, shotgun approach of let me just gather as much information I can.
Yeah.
I don't know what your experience, but mine has been over decades of my career is and deals from, 5-figure deals to 9-figure deals, sure, is that there's always one thing that's more important than all the others.
Totally.
And you need to find out what that one thing is. And if until you understand that, then you're either at a competitive risk or risk of them just staying status quo.
Yep.
But everybody that's what I talk about is our job is to listen and understand what are the most important things to them, because if we don't understand what's the most important, we don't have a path forward.
Yeah.
And I learned this early in my career when I was selling computer systems for accounting purposes to construction industry.
Yeah.
Back when computers filled a room full of equipment. And I remember going through a really competitive sales process, multiple vendors, and we had to demonstrate every single general ledger package a million times. And we had to jump through all these hoops. You've been through there again and again.
Absolutely.
And I remember going back to the customer, I don't know, maybe 6 months after they had started implementing. And we'd sold them like 10 general, different payables, receivables, job costs, all these packages. They were just running billing. I look at I talked to the CEO. I said, I know you're only running billing. He goes, oh yeah. Yeah. That's what's paying for the whole thing. I'm like, you son of a bitch. You made us jump through so many hoops.
Just for billing.
And you don't even tend to implement most of those probably.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, that's like for me, a young person in a sales career is like, oh, and that's suddenly that repeated itself time and time again. All these stories, like there's usually just one thing that's more important. If you figure out what that is, if you can learn what that is, build trust, build the connection, ask the great questions, keep pinging, you'll find out what that is. And when you know that, yeah, you're in a position to win. And
it might surprise you what that one thing is.
Oh, it oftentimes will. Well, I have another story is I tells one is, so with one startup I was with, we were selling these big satellite communication systems, and we were in a competition to sell to biggest cruise line in Asia at the time. This is a while ago. I don't know if they still are. And this was going to be the first system almost really in the world that was going to be high-speed browsing in the stateroom and voice over IP. And we were a small company competing against these big tech integrators that were, going all out to get this business.
Yeah.
And we did get down selected to like the final three, and then they submit this RFP for the final three vendors. And it's the compliance matrix was like 30 pages long, all these items, things we had to comply with. And I turned to the guys, the account manager, and I said, or account executive, I said, so these are not all equally important. So you need to go find out which ones they're really driving them and their decision.
Right.
So he did. He got on a plane, went back to Asia, and called me, and he said, "Got it." He said, so he had a conversation with the chairman, CEO of the company, and they'd gone out and had some beers and so on. It sort of revealed that, high-speed browsing in the stateroom, that's fine. Voice RP, that's great. That'd be nice to have.
Yeah.
What he really wanted was he wanted real-time, up-to-the-minute information on the take from the casinos on board the ships.
Oh.
Because that's where all the money was being made.
Absolutely.
So the others, but they took up nowhere in the RFP wasn't really mentioned that this was the real thing for him.
So now
we could address that. So we shifted the proposal all around. We said, look, we're going to give you a dedicated link just for the casino. We're going to have hot swap standby on board, so it never, ever goes down, no matter what happens.
That's right.
And pretty much ignored 3/4 of what was in the RFP.
And
we won.
There you go.
Because that was the most important thing.
That's so cool.
It's there. You just have to find it. Everybody has it.
I love it.
And you may say, okay, multiple stakeholders, they may have multiple different most important things. Absolutely. Part of your job is how you're going to reconcile that.
Yeah. A similar story, the one that was a shocker to me, right? So this is years ago. I was selling it wasn't a huge deal, but it was more of a optimization for a marketing automation platform, right? And it was highly competitive. I think there were 3-4 of the standard competitors in that set. And we learned that the woman that we were selling to as the primary stakeholder, what she really wanted was to be standing up on the stage speaking and telling her story at the next user conference, right? So once we knew that, we were able to tailor
invitation in the mail.
Yeah, exactly right. Like once we knew that, we could tailor our approach to her standing up on stage and delivering, because it's going to be the best practice. It's going to be blah, blah, blah. And it was the difference maker, right? That's ultimately what we wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, that's also leads to another critical point, which is, in the stakeholder groups is they're not all equul. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody thinks stakeholders, consensus. It's like,
no,
maybe. But there was some research done by a professor at USC named Steve Martin, not the comedian, but he did on I don't know, it was maybe 5 years ago on buying groups. He said, people are humans, right? It's like you put 12 people together for a jury. The dominant personalities stand out and they're more influential.
Always.
Similar to in stakeholder. So in a stakeholder group, there's going to be, the bully with the pulpit, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to find out who that person is too. So not only what is most important to them, who is it most important to?
Yeah. And I think it's important in that it's not always the highest level C title.
No.
I think that's a de facto thing. Oh, I've got the decision maker. I've got the CEO on the phone. I've lost deals, unfortunately, with, had the buy-in from the CEO, and that wasn't enough.
Or, yes, I've seen that. Or I had situations where I was actually on the receiving end of this, is where I was running this division of this company, and we were specifying some chips that were going to go into a product we were building. My engineers had specified, but the salesperson from one chip manufacturer, unnamed, a very large one, insisted. He said, we said, you got the order. No, I need to talk to the CEO. It's like, this had been the method, right? They've been trained, had to talk.
Right. Had to.
Yeah. And so I said, okay, because I knew it was exactly what was going to happen. Is he goes, and this was a technical founder of the CEO. Yeah. So he and one of the brightest engineers I ever met.
Yeah.
And so he gets the meeting and he pitches the CEO, and the CEO goes, why am I in this meeting? Obviously. And the guy sort of says, well, I want to make sure you're buying, blah, blah, blah. The CEO goes, well, I didn't really have an opinion about that before, but now I do. And guess what? It wasn't good for this guy at all.
Nope.
And it's like, I've seen this play out on multiple occasions. Is, there are people, I call them actual decision makers, right?
Yeah.
Whether they have P&L responsibility or they got operational responsibility for something, they're the ones that you have to get the buy-in from. And yeah, you can spend doing a lot of time doing what I call overselling, which is selling too high in the organization when you don't really need to. Well, and there's actually a way you can sort of graph it out. I create a little quadrant in my first book. I talk about this, create a little quadrant, and sort of on the x-axis is strategic nature to the company. I said, one is a very strategic or not strategic, and then cost, right?
Yeah.
And on that y-axis. And so if it's really strategic and more expensive in the upper right-hand quadrant, then you expect you're going to call higher.
Yeah, for sure.
In the organization, right? But if it's otherwise, then probably not. You can plot where you stand. You just have to be pragmatic about how strategic your product really is to the company and the mission of the company you're selling to.
Well, and going back to your, 4 pillars, right? So say the salesperson in that situation that you outlined, where they're selling to you and they did all those things great, the connectivity, the curiosity, the understanding, and the generosity. Well, they broke that down and went the other way by making that move, right? Like the trust wall, you just threw up a trust barrier that you had broken down. Now it's back up.
Yeah. Well, and so think about this. This happens all the time though, unintentionally, sometimes intentionally, but
sure.
Is think about sellers that it's on the other end, the sellers that bring in the bosses.
The boss, yeah.
Too soon.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And too often. And sometimes you just have to tell your boss, back off, mm-hmm. Right? I'm not bringing you in. Because depending on what they say when they come in, is basically it's very common for, if you bring your VP in, VP says something, and usually what they do is they ask the buyer, start telling their story again. Mm-hmm. So, tell me about your requirements. Tell me, it's like, as soon as they do that, they're telegraphing to the buyer, this person doesn't have a lot of trust in the salesperson because he's asking for all the information we already gave them.
Yep.
So, it goes both ways. You got to be very careful.
I see that happen so much in the B2B SaaS world. We have a lot of software partners, and I wind up getting in co-sales deals with them as a professional services and consulting firm. And you see these manager ride-alongs from day one.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, man, what are you doing? Why can't we just have some dialogue and just, like you said, let's start at the beginning. Let's connect with these people, right? You don't need your manager for that. Let's just get into it a little bit.
Got a rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Okay. Rule of thumb is your odds of winning a deal are in inverse proportion to the number of times you ask the buyer to tell you their story. So anytime you bring someone new into the account and they go,
tell them the story.
Tell us about you again. And what are you trying to achieve and so on? The more you do that, the less likely you are going to be to win the deal.
That's great stuff, Andy. I love it. Well, Andy, where can the listeners find you? Where can they find your book? Like, give us the rundown.
Sure. Well, find the book wherever you buy your books online.
All right.
Amazon. It's available in all 3 versions. If you like audiobook, digital book, real books, real paperback books. Actually, a lot of people buying the audiobook and the real book. That's
love it.
I like that, but it's nice. They like to listen to it. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Very active on LinkedIn. So Andy Paul, and connect with me. Yeah. Message me if you have any questions about the book. Otherwise, you can go to my website, andypaul.com, and you can download a free chapter of the book. And I actually have a little fun little quiz there, an assessment, if you will.
Love it.
Whether you're salesy or not salesy, figure out whether you're selling out or selling in, where you sit on the spectrum between the two.
I'm on it. I'll be doing that right after we finish recording.
Yeah. Well, it's not hugely scientific, but it is fun.
Very fun. Well, Andy, thank you for joining the show. Listeners, if you enjoyed Andy, please go and give us a review. We would love to have that. Andy, have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you.